fish stocks. They're almost depleted already. This is something everyone notices from a day-to-day basis. If we can restock some of that and resurface that with sustainable aquaculture, then that's one way of making sure we're not depleting it completely.
Those were the inspiring words of today's guest, Stig Martin Fiskå. And as you all know, our mission here on this podcast is to unpack the complex world of technology, make it accessible and relatable to everyone, and think bigger about some of the problems that we can solve by leveraging technology. And today I've got an incredibly relevant conversation ahead, particularly if you are one of the 3.3 billion people worldwide whose livelihoods are intricately connected to the ocean. Because it's no secret that the health of our oceans is currently in peril. And by that I mean everything from climate change impacts to over-exploitation, and all of which poses challenges to numerous industries reliant on these ecosystems. So to discuss these issues today, my special guest, Stig Martin Fiskå, is the Global Head of Ocean at Cognizant. And he's going to be enlightening us on the transformative role of AI technology and the role it can play in decarbonizing the oceans and mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. And we're also going to delve into how AI can optimize fish farming, measure biodiversity for sustainable energy projects, and even analyze large data sets to revolutionize ship routes for fuel efficiency and reduced emissions. So many exciting things to talk about today, but enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you are in the world, I'm going to be beaming your ears all the way to Oslo in Norway, where Stig is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Niels. Thanks for having me. And I'm Stig Martin Fiskå. I'm the global head of Cognizant Ocean. And besides that, I'm a father for 2 girls, which I care very much for and want to create a better world for, which is part of my motivation, actually, to do what I do. I'm a serial entrepreneur before joining Cognizant, and I've been working with AI since 2012-ish. Recently got the honor of getting together this initiative called Cognizant Ocean that I lead globally. So that's what I am, and that's what I do.
Awesome. And that's one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today, because every day I try and get people thinking differently about how technology is impacting our life, our work, and even world. And at the moment, there's 2 huge topics. There's AI and decarbonisation, sustainability, etc. But you don't necessarily hear them in the same sentence. So can you speak on the effectiveness of AI in decarbonising oceans, and also what metrics or KPIs can be used to measure these real-world impacts on mitigating climate change in marine ecosystems? Because it's a huge thing you're going after here, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And you're right. It's spoken too little of it. And first of all, just want to kind of educate the audience a little bit on the problem we're going after. Yeah. Because decarbonization, why would it matter in the sense of the ocean specifically? And I know me growing up in school, I was taught that the rainforest was the one important thing we could save to save ourselves from climate change and oxygen and so on and so forth. Well, it turns out that the ocean contains around 90% of our CO2 emissions, and it can't take it anymore. And I'm sure most of us have seen the headlines coming this summer and before that the ocean is heating up, and that's because of this. The carbon it's containing, and it's getting warmer and warmer. And I think it's also baffling to a lot of people to learn that somewhere between 70 and 80% of the breathable oxygen that we consume actually comes from the oceans and not the rainforest. So this is the kind of the background why this is so important. And at the same time, we have a huge maritime industry that affects around somewhere beyond 3.3 billion people on Earth, but in reality, I would say affects most of us because it's running the global shipping economy and other things that rely on the ocean, and it's becoming over-exploited, and we're basically ruining what we need to live as humanity. So that's why this is important, and that's why you should hear AI and decarbonization together way more often. I think it's really important. So why can it matter? Well, one of the biggest problems is that it's a huge place. It covers more than 70% of our surface, even more if you count it in space, in space, and it's or in volume, and we don't know what's there. And it's a very complex ecosystem. It depends on things happening on land, of course. It depends on things happening in the shores, in the rivers, in our lakes, but also deep where people have no idea what's there. And I think AI is perfect to kind of fathom that and put that into systems where we can do something about it and make it actionable, so we can change the way we operate towards much smarter and more informed ways of doing it. And that's essentially what AI is to me anyway. Yeah. And doing that together with decarbonization of the oceans is a meaningful purpose. So that's why it matters. That's why we're doing it, and that's why AI and decarbonization fits together. I can give you examples of some use cases and KPIs where this is
please
makes sense, right?
Yeah,
exactly. So imagine global shipping, right? These are thousands of ships running our goods all over the world, and 70 to 80% of global shipping is interrupted every day. That's huge, right? And they use fuel, and that's the number one reason to get carbon out there, right? So if we can get away from all these interruptions, if we can plan and run things smarter, and we can do it in a way where we cut fuels, that's right up there. That's directly into why we should do this and why AI can help you on decarbonization. So that's one. There's lots of other areas as well. It's like in aquaculture, the number one, both OPEX but also polluting factor for CO2 emissions and even local emissions for that matter is feed to the fish or other species. And if we can feed them smarter, use different ingredients and have more control in that ecosystem, we can get down the carbonization of that industry as well. And just to give you a figure, I mean, global shipping, the sea part of it is about 2.5% of the global emissions. So it's really impactful if we can do something here. And we think we can, together with our partners, we think we can cut fuel consumption by 21 billion annually.
Wow.
So that's quite big numbers.
It is, and I think we often forget that, as you said a few moments ago, 70% of the Earth's surface is water covered, and the oceans, I think, also hold about 96.5% of all Earth's water. And I'm curious, how did this partnership between Cognizant and Tidal come about, and what have been the most significant outcomes so far? Did you come across any technical challenges along the way? Apologies, I've just thrown about 4 questions in one at you, but it's an exciting space, isn't it?
It is. I'll try to come to your questions, and then please feel free to remind me if I forget some of them. But yeah, it came about through human connection quite easily, I would say. There's a time and space where I worked closely with Google, sister company of Tidal and Alphabet X, and some of these Googlers were hearing some rumors and talking to me about the fact that we were doing some scientific research in AI and data science around salmon farms in Norway. And I happened to be over in the valley, in Mountain View, as a matter of fact. And they told me that there is a project going on that does affect and work really hard around AI and aquaculture. So they made an introduction, really, and it was a case of where people align on both mission, purpose, and how to get there.
Yeah.
And it evolved over a relatively short time, a couple of months in the beginning, to talk about a live global partnership. So that's how we got together, got to meet the people behind it, and figured out that we have a shared mission and a shared purpose and a will to do it. And that was it, basically. So that's how we started out, and then from going there to having some significant outputs, I think some of the things we're seeing is very early yet, right? I'm not going to hide that some of this stuff that we're doing is novel. and it is at, some of it isn't at scale yet. But we're seeing in aquaculture specifically that some of the things that were set out by Tidal early on getting down local pollution and getting better on feeding and less wasteful, that's definitely already happening. And we're now at scale and commercial use on the aquaculture products. And at the same time, we're also seeing a huge movement in the ocean shipping industry, that they're also really looking to partner up and solve some of these problems. They've tried to solve them, and they are partially solving them already by themselves, but that we can contribute. And we're meeting an industry that's largely very much open to co-creation and looking forward to how to meet their net zero goals, etc. And I'm seeing a movement where people are realizing that there isn't a opposite between being sustainable and being profitable. It's the same thing. There's no discussion really around that anymore. And that's a big movement in itself. And then co-creating with these industries, having a Tidal and Alphabet X, Cognizant, and the client there, it just makes for a real change and a real power behind things, rather than trying to do this one by one. So that's like on top of mind of the change we have been set out to do already, and things that are working.
And I'm curious, because technology does have its limitations, especially in different environments. So I'm curious, did you encounter any challenges or technological challenges when working in some of the harshest environments known to man?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything you put into the oceans that doesn't belong there from the beginning, organically or so, it will try to kill off. I mean, it's salty, it's currents, it's waves, it's weather. It's in large parts of the world in the northern hemisphere, it's also extremely cold. So there's icy conditions, etc. And it's dark. And what a lot of people will also be surprised is it's really noisy, even underwater. I mean, we're used to being on land, of course, but underwater there's a lot of noise. There's something called marine snow. There's a lot of species going on. And the hardest part, I would say, is, again, we don't know what's there. It's not mapped out in the same way. There's no 3D model Google Maps for the oceans yet. And so we don't know what's there. We encounter species that we didn't know how to play in the game, plants, etc. So it's how do you measure this? How do you document it? And how do you start doing interventions without knowing if you're changing something wrongly in the other end of it? So if we start doing one thing, that might affect other parts of the ecosystem, and that's a typical human way of doing things. I think that's basically what we've done up until now. We start somewhere, and then we don't see the effect of what we're doing in the other parts of the ecosystem until years later, and then maybe too late in some cases even. So I think that really hard change part of this is the complexity and trying to holistically understand what we're doing and the impact it will have. I'll give you an example. If we clean up an area of water, a body of water, remove what everyone would think of harmful chemistry, algae, whatever it might be, that might actually kill off a lot of the biodiversity in the river, right? Because it's getting adapted to it. Some of it is used to feeding it, so on and so forth. So we need to do this in a very mindful way to understand the total setting. And again, it's a very large body of water, so it's not easy.
And I think one of the applications of AI that particularly caught my attention before you came on the podcast is in optimizing fish farming practices. So can you tell me more about that, and how scalable and adaptable are these AI solutions, especially in developing countries where sustainable farming practices are more desperately needed?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. And I think, Neil, coming to your latter part of the question there, other parts, I mean, we're at scale now, and it's scalable in Norway, and that's where it's massively being deployed with around 600 to 800 devices running around in fish pens. These are autonomous underwater robots. It's the best way of describing the best fusion between hardware and AI software that's running autonomously around and doing observing fish and taking actions. But moving that to Southeast Asia or other places, I mean, it's warmer. There's different currents. There might be less fish, and because it's warmer, there will be less oxygen, dissolved oxygen in the water around it. So things change. So it needs to be adapted, and there's a lot of testing going around already on this to adapt. But the main technology and the main know-how behind this is surprisingly well adaptable, and it's surprisingly the same things. I mean, Norway has a sea lice issue. Other parts of the world have other parasites, and it's quite transferable. You need to do some adaptations, but the problems are very similar. And then you have practical things like in Japan, I'm aware that they use fish pens that are square, not round. So they're practical things, but I'd say as a framework, as a know-how, and also in the terms of the physical devices, if they can survive in the hardest part of Norway, they can definitely be used other places around the world. And then it's all about getting scale so we can get a price level and a size, adapted size that fits into the different parts of the world as well.
So when AI is employed to measure existing biodiversity, I'm curious, were there any surprising or even counterintuitive findings that AI revealed in that area? Did those insights then influence policy or business decisions, etc.? Were there any surprises in there?
Oh yeah, tons. I mean, yeah. One of the stories I've been told was that early on, no one really thought much about the fact that they were. So biomass is all about figuring out how much human edible protein is in a fish pan, essentially, right? That you can send to the market. And the key question is, how do you measure how much fish is in there? The problem is that you might assume it's just salmon or another species in there, but there isn't. There's lots of other species in there. So there'll be cod, there'll be all kinds of other fish in there because they get through the net, and they would like to be fed as well, right? It's they're looking for food like everyone else, but they're not sellable and they're not part of the market that they're going to. So one of the early issues would be just to identify what is what. And if you can imagine a net full of 200,000 salmon plus maybe 10%, or I don't know the exact accurate number, but around 10%, say, of other fish species in there, you have to distinguish them and say, these we don't count into this, and also start observing what are they doing. How can they be a part of the ecosystem? Can we use them for something? So that's certainly like a very tangible surprise. And the other part I think is introducing elements into the fish habitat is not an easy thing. If for instance, if you were to turn on a floodlight, they could get so scared that they snap their spine. Yeah. So these are very practical things you have to get around. So you have to introduce a autonomous underwater robot in a very, very careful way so they get used to having it in their environment, understand that it's not hurting them. And then it's all the observations that's being done. I believe there's some 22 or even more million observations of salmon specifically, and learning from how they behave and literally their body language, and how we can use that to inform both fish health, feeding them at the right time, but all other things that we can learn and understand from that species alone. That's amazing. So you can get lost, literally lost into this. But it does inform business very often. So like I said, body language is something the fish farmers that have for a long time themselves observed. Now with AI and perception and camera vision, we can actually see the correlation between the way they behave and if they're hungry, the way they school together, and if they're now fed and feel fine, and we can turn off the feeding. So that all of this matters. The more you understand, the more granular you're able to, and automatically you're able to do actions around it, the better we become. So yeah, I'd say there's very little that isn't useful in one way or another, and then some of the findings, and you won't know that until you discovered most of it. will be big things in terms of fish health or in terms of business decisions.
And I was also reading before you came on the podcast that the AI platforms analyse a vast array of data points, including things like satellite, weather, vessel data, etc. So I've got to ask, how do you ensure the data integrity, given that it comes from multiple different sources, and how do you deal with any potential biases that might come up in that data too?
This is an excellent question, Neil, and it's even back to where we started. It's how do you measure what you don't know is there?
Yeah,
just the bias of that alone. So we don't have a perfect answer, I would say, on this, and still very early day in the vast ecosystem that we're looking at. But give you an example. So we just talked about aquaculture, right? One way of being very meticulous around the results is just making sure that we actually count the fish, and not just a few fish for the sake of but statistically significant number of fish that we do manually to check that things are okay, and that's something Tidal is doing. They're not just counting a few fish and seeing if they're right, but they're taking out a lot and then making a lot of manual tests to show that they're not off, and to improve their models, of course. And in shipping, one of the biggest problems there would be So one big thing that the industry is already doing is route optimization. So how do you get to point from A to B in the most efficient way? Well, one problem there is you'll never do the same exact journey ever again, because the weather and the waves and the currents and the sun and whatever will never be exactly the same again. It's not possible. So one of the ways we're doing that is basically saying, here is every possible scenario that can happen. We will optimize for the one we think will happen statistically and machine learning wise. And then afterwards, we will measure that it was better than any other possible scenario, because we can never do the same thing again. So it's not possible to redo the trip and say, yeah, you did cut, 24% fuel. That's not possible by doing it in the old way, I would say. So you have to find different ways to check and balance this. Some of them are physical and some of them are mathematics, basically. And then when it comes to biases, I would say one of the biggest things is there are two folds. There's working closely and doing this in co-creation with the industry themselves, so they can actually verify that, this is how we see things. This is years and years and years, and I mean, shipping is hundreds of years of knowledge. So this makes sense. That's one. And the other one is to bring along other scientists from universities and other environments that also can have a check and balances on all of this. And I have to say, at the end of the day, the focus for us and our partners is to make meaningful change fast and not to count it perfectly. It's much bigger to do 10% change than be able to document 1% or less than 1% change. So that's our focus, is really to drive the change. And then I'm sure we'll find really good ways, both from regulators and universities and others, to measure and be exact about it. But we need to do something right now, not just report on it.
And considering that the poor health of the oceans and the fact that it does indeed impact more than 3.3 billion people who also have livelihoods connected to the ocean, and maybe an attempt to bring to life the scale of the problem that we're talking about today and the role of technology in solving it, can you quantify the economic benefits achieved or targeted through some of these AI interventions that we're talking about today?
Well, I think that needs to be broken down again, because it's a huge thing. But we can start really, really big and say, well, we know that the oceans are heating up. What will happen if it stops producing? Because we're killing off plankton, we're killing off useful algae, we're killing off seaweed and mangroves. What will happen if we can't produce more oxygen? That's a big question, right? So that's a way of quantifying it. But the way we're doing it is mostly by going industry by industry. And I mentioned shipping. If we can cut 24 billion in costs of fuel, then that's equivalent in CO2 emissions, right? I don't know exactly the number. We have done calculations on port specifics and travel specifics, but what it will actually be is hard to say. But we know if we're using less fuel, we're doing the right thing, and that's what it matters to us. And I think for the 3.3 billion people or more that have their livelihoods connected to them, that it's alive. We're depleting, fish stocks. They're almost depleted already. This is something everyone notices from a day-to-day basis. If we can restock some of that and reservice that with sustainable aquaculture, then that's one way of making sure we're not depleting it completely. Those are economic benefits by far. And then we have quite simple things, but huge things like clean water. How do we make sure, and how can we measure, and we all understand the effect, I think, of having polluted water, either be salt water or fresh water. They're all connected because bodies of water from fresh water do run into the oceans. And if they're all polluted, we won't have any way to drink. There won't be any life in the rivers or in the oceans or in the shores. So really big things, but we're trying to break it down what that means in a daily operating model for the industries themselves. I don't know if I was able to be clear enough. It's such a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question. I think also AI does have it as advantages, but it's also too important to address some of the limitations and maybe potential ethical concerns. So again, I'm curious, have you encountered any ethical dilemmas when dealing with AI and natural ecosystems? Anything you've come across here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can mention another area that we're spawning into, which is renewable energy. I think that is a tangible way of exemplifying this.
Yeah.
So I think most of us are quite excited and are cheering for more renewable energy. I don't think there's a big question around that. And one of the sources for renewable energy being built out multiple places around the world is wind farms. Now, it's easy to think that, well, we're building them in the ocean, so they won't be bothering us on land. We won't have the noise pollution or the visual in our landscape, because we won't see them because they're quite far offshore. But when we're building, we're also disturbing the ecosystem there, right? So that's an ethical problem. We want to do something good, but at the same time, we're in danger of disturbing an ecosystem we don't know enough about. So that's where we go in and we try to understand what's there, map it out using AI and perception, camera vision, audio, chemical sensing, of course, and then see. Outside, for instance, outside of New York, there is a tracking of whales going there to that they pass every so often. How can we build in a way where we don't disturb the existing ecosystem, but at the same time we want to make sure that we are not we're not doing harm to the local society or community, and we're not stopping the evolution that we also need. It's a very, very hard balance. So what we're actually trying to do is navigate between building something new, making sure that mitigates as much as possible the harm it does, and try to actually build. So if you build a wind farm, you can also start to build a coral reef or another ecosystem around that actually gives back to the ocean. So these are the dilemmas that we're stuck with, and that we're trying to dabble with and actually find solutions for, and partner with the ones who are doing a lot of the physical infrastructure around this. So that's it's not easy, but it's certainly a way forward, and there are many solutions around it, and we're also seeing that the regulators are coming with the demands around this. So wind farms, for instance, are getting regulated. There will be demands around documenting that you're not making too much harm.
And if I was to ask you to gaze into our virtual crystal ball here, look into the future, as the global head of ocean at Cognizant, what is your vision for the future role of AI in ocean conservation? And are there any other emerging technologies like IoT or blockchain that you might see converging with AI to enhance its impact? Because there's so much scope here. I'm just curious where you see it all converging, where it's heading in the future.
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not Nostradamus, and I think anyone who has tried to try, especially in this day and age, try to look into the future, they will miss by quite a lot. But I think looking more into the immediate future, I think in terms of ocean conservation and operating the heavy asset industry in the oceans, I think you're going to see both from a regulatory demand, economic demand, but also I'm seeing a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs standing up and say that we want to play a different part into this, not just for the sake of the short term. I think we're going to see a lot more focus and a lot more willingness to find solution and implement them fast. I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to see not only that we're increasing, I think we're around 2% of the ocean is now being preserved as an undisturbed habitat. Where the measure where we want to go is 30%. I think we're going to see easier way to do that as we understand how the ecosystem is working and how we can do business around it and not on top of it. And I think you're going to see that a lot of this will emerge out to new business models. So very easy example, if you're building something in the oceans, why not also get carbon credits for creating seaweeds and other carbon sequential items out there? So have a double business model, right? If you're doing renewable energy, you can do both. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. So that's super interesting. And I think we haven't even started that journey, but that's how we should look at it. And on the technology side, I mean, the things we're doing is already merging many different parts of technology. IoT is definitely already part of what we're doing. We can't sense anything or see anything underwater if we don't use IoT. That's a critical part of what we're doing, but it has to be merged with the intelligence and the understanding of data and AI to be able to do anything and to be able to understand what we're seeing. And when it comes to other technologies, like just pure old engineering, both physical and software engineering, it's a critical part again. We can't be able to do anything without the merger of all these. So that's, I think we're going to go to we're already partially there, but I think we're going to see a large movement to multifaceted teams and competences that go together to fix problems, rather to sit and say, I'm an AI specialist, and I'm an IoT specialist, and I'm a software engineer, and I am a nuts and bolts engineer. You're going to have to go together and go around business problems and go around big missions that we need to fix. And I think that's how we will fix it. And I think that's exactly what we're doing right now. We have multi-competence teams sitting together and understanding the problem from their perspective, and then articulating it together and then solving it. And that's a really, really cool thing to see, and a really nice time to be in as a technologist, as a business person myself, to see this happening in front of my eyes. It's something that motivates me.
It really is an incredible, cool thing there, an inspiring work. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights around this work and what you're doing by leveraging technology to decarbonize the oceans, mitigate the impacts of climate change on their ecosystems. And as a small thank you, I'm going to see if there's something we can do for you now, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So let's see if we can manifest something together here. Is there a person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, and why? Because he or she might just be listening today. We might be able to make something happen, but who would that person be and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. And So the one person, if I can point out the one person that kind of really opened my eyes of the potential and where we really are going to head and AI for good. I was lucky enough to meet in a small group, together with a small group in Mountain View. I was lucky enough to meet Jeff Dean, the head, who used to be the head of Google Brain, but also the guy who wrote together with his business partner a lot of the algorithms behind the Google search. An incredibly humble, but also obviously very, very smart, bright person, and I was able to get in a few words. This is long before people talked about biases in AI, and generally AI wasn't as mainstream as it is today. And we were discussing biases. We were discussing how we can get away from biases by using, obviously, if you and I know the difference between right and wrong, the data does exist. So we had those kind of philosophical discussions, and at the same time, Jeff was showing some inventions that we're doing by scanning irises and doing medical diagnosis. And this is back in 2016, 17 or so, and the promise and the things that were laying ahead of us motivated me very much to go into this business and do something meaningful with the technology. And I would love to sit down again and have a one-on-one lunch with Jeff and just learn his perspective, what's happened those few years now going past. Because not a lot of these things that we now are seeing with ChatGPT and LLMs and all of that stuff, the promise that people now are also opening their eyes for were already known back then. And I would like to sit down and have this discussion with him. How can we accelerate what we learned some years ago, even to do more good, even faster? How can we take the past few years, maybe not so fast movement in AI, and accelerate it and do it even better? And of course, if we could get Sam from OpenAI to join that discussion at the end, that would have been the time of my life. So that's my little dream there.
Well, we will release that into the ether. Let's see what we can make happen today. Hopefully, this message will find its way to him. And for everyone else listening, where is the best place for them to find out more information about anything that we discussed today? Maybe they want to get involved. Maybe they want to ask a few questions. Where would you like to point everyone?
Well, they're essentially, you can, of course, Google Cognizant Ocean, and you'll find a lot of information online about us. And the other thing is just to connect to me on LinkedIn. I think that's wonderful. I get lots of people who connect to me on LinkedIn and ask how they can contribute. They come with problems, and they have small ideas. And also partners. We're looking for partners all the time to build out this ecosystem, because we don't believe we can do this alone. We need more people in this, not just clients, but also an ecosystem of partners that bring their own solutions to the table. So please connect on LinkedIn or just Google us. It would be an honor to come talk to you or just have some messages forth and back.
Fantastic. Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And I suspect you've set off a few light bulb moments in people listening when you were sharing those use cases of AI to improve our oceans. I think it does go beyond what many people may have thought previously possible. So I'd love to get more people involved, explore that art of the possible, and maybe join your ecosystem of partners. So hopefully people will reach out and contact you. But thank you so much, Stig, for sitting down and sharing your story today.
Well, thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that last there. I really hope people do get together and we get around this shared mission. And
wow, what an insightful conversation that was with Stig Martin Fiskå. I think we navigated through the ocean of possibilities that AI can bring to the table, and also addressed some of the choppy waters of ethical and practical challenges. Apologies for the sea of puns there, but I really do think Stig brought us face to face with the power of technology, but also urged us all to sail cautiously, considering the complexities and delicate balances with marine ecosystems. And as you've heard, the potential for AI to be a force for good is immense, but that journey is fraught with complexities that require multidisciplinary collaboration, ethical considerations, and innovative thinking. And I urge you all, if you're if you were inspired by anything we talked about, please reach out to him on LinkedIn. I know he would love to hear from you. And if you're intrigued as I am and want to know more about Cognizant Ocean, please remember, search for it online, connect with Stig, and remember, whether it's figuring out how to feed fish more precisely or charting a new course for shipping, AI also has a role in the betterment of our oceans and ultimately our planet. And that is undeniable. And with great power comes great responsibility. Yes, we need to implement it wisely and ethically, but let's have that conversation today. And if there's anything that you would like to comment or talk with me about, and together help break down the complexities of technology so we can grasp the true potential and the pitfalls, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @NeilC.Hughes. If you want to work with me, whether that be writing tech articles or launching your own podcast, pop over to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll also find over 2,500 interviews just like this one. But that's it today. So thank you, Stig, for joining us, and an even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in to this podcast. And hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.